He remembered the faces, comrades lost, enemies fallen, the young men he had once trained, the innocent lives caught between blades. For each memory he breathed once, slowly letting it pass through him like the wind through reeds. He was not erasing the past, he was releasing it. When dawn arrived, the samurai stood and sheathed the sword once more. The silence within him was no longer heavy, it was alive. A silence not of emptiness but of presence. The stillness before creation, the pause between lightning and thunder. He descended the mountain path toward the valley where his old clan had gathered. There, among the ruins of a fortress, banners fluttered once more. The insignia of his lineage, once a symbol of honor, now stood for pride and power. At the fortress gates, guards recognized him instantly. They fell silent as he approached, uncertain whether to bow or to raise their weapons. He passed them without a word. His presence alone was command enough. Inside, he found the new leader of the clan, a young warlord burning with ambition. The boy had been a child when the samurai left, but he had grown into a man shaped by vengeance. His army was large, his voice loud, his heart restless. He spoke endlessly of conquest, of restoring their name, of seizing what had been stolen. The old samurai listened. And when the young warlord demanded his allegiance, the old man simply turned and walked away. That single act and that refusal to answer was like a blade, cutting through illusion. For silence can wound deeper than words. The young warlord's pride was pierced. He sent his soldiers after the old man, declaring that no one would defy his rule. The pursuit was merciless, yet when they reached the base of the mountain, they found only footprints leading into the fog, and then nothing. Days later, stories began to spread through the valleys again. Soldiers who had gone to hunt the old samurai returned, changed. Some laid down their weapons and swore never to fight again. Others simply disappeared into monasteries seeking peace. No one could explain what had happened in that mist. But those who saw him spoke of a light in the fog, a faint glimmer like a blade reflecting dawn, followed by a stillness that silenced even the birds. The old samurai had not killed anyone. Yet battles ended wherever he went. Armies disbanded, tempers cooled. His silence had become a force stronger than fear itself. It was not the silence of absence, and it was the silence of mastery. The silence that comes when one has faced the deepest noise within and found peace on the other side. Weeks passed, and the war began to fade. People returned to their homes. Rivers cleared and fields began to grow again. The legend of the old samurai spread like wind through the mountains, a whisper of hope, a reminder that true strength needs no sound. Yet even as peace returned, the old man knew his journey was not complete. For beyond the mountains, a deeper battle awaited, not between clans or soldiers, but within the heart of humanity itself. He knew that to end the cycle of violence, he would need to do something greater than defeat enemies. He would need to teach others to listen, to themselves, to the wind, to the silence between moments. And so he turned once more toward the setting sun, walking alone along the river's edge. The sky burned orange and crimson above him, as if the heavens themselves were bowing in respect. The old samurai's journey was not over. It was only changing form, from war to wisdom, from sword to silence, from victory to peace. The mountains faded behind him, but his presence lingered like an echo across the land, a reminder that even in a world of chaos, there are those who conquer not by sound but by stillness. The echo of the blade. There was once a mountain village shrouded in mist and memory. The villagers called it Tsukimura, the village of the moon, for its nights gleamed with silver light that danced upon the quiet rivers and ancient stones. In that village lived an old man who rarely spoke, and whom everyone called simply the old samurai. He lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of a cedar forest, where the wind whispered like a forgotten prayer. His days were spent sweeping fallen leaves from his porch, tending a small garden and feeding the stray cat that had made its home by his door. Children would sometimes watch him from afar, whispering stories their parents had told them, tales of a once great warrior, undefeated in battle, who had vanished after the war, leaving behind his sword and his voice. No one had ever seen him draw a blade. No one had ever heard him raise his voice. Yet there was a presence about him, an unshakable stillness that made even the wild dogs quiet when he passed. Long ago, before the village was rebuilt, there had been wars, senseless, endless wars. The old man had fought through them all. His name had once commanded respect, fear, and envy alike, but the years had stripped him of titles, of comrades, and of purpose. When the final war ended, he walked away from the noise, seeking something that swords could never bring, and peace. Now, in his silence, he had found a different kind of strength. Each morning, as dawn broke, he would step into the courtyard and bow before the rising sun. His body, though old, still moved with precision, every breath measured, every motion deliberate. It was said that he trained with an invisible blade, cutting through the air as if shaping the wind itself. And though no one understood why, even the birds seemed to pause when he moved. The villagers respected him, but few dared approach. His silence was a mirror. It made people face the noise within themselves. To stand before him was to feel one's own restlessness revealed. One day, a storm rolled through the mountains. The rivers swelled, and a group of traveling warriors arrived in the village, seeking shelter. They were young, brash, and full of the kind of pride that comes from untested strength. The villagers gave them food and rest, but it wasn't long before whispers spread. The travelers had heard of the old samurai. They scoffed at the idea that a man who never spoke, who never fought, could have once been a master. That evening, as the storm raged, they made their way to his house. From a distance, the villagers watched in fear and fascination. The young warriors surrounded the old man's home, shouting challenges into the rain, demanding he come out and prove his worth. But there was no answer. Only the sound of rain on wood and the steady rhythm of a broom sweeping the porch. The leader of the travelers grew impatient. He kicked over the wooden bucket near the door, spilling water into the dirt. The villagers gasped, but the old samurai did not react. He continued sweeping, his face calm, his movements unbroken. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on the hearts of everyone who watched. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath, and then slowly the old man stopped. He leaned the broom against the wall and turned his gaze toward the young men. His eyes, though tired, held the weight of 1,000 unspoken lessons. He said nothing, not a single word, yet something shifted. The leader took a step back. He couldn't explain it, but it felt as though the storm itself had stilled around them. The rain softened, the thunder faded to a distant murmur. In that silence, the young men felt their arrogance crumble. Without a single strike, without a single sound, the old samurai had defeated them. The next morning, the travelers left the village without a word. The villagers gathered near the old man's home, but he did not come out. He returned to his daily rhythm as if nothing had happened. The story, however, spread through the valley like wildfire, not of a duel, but of a silence so powerful it could humble warriors. In the days that followed, people began visiting him, seeking wisdom, answers, or simply the presence of his quiet strength. Farmers came with questions about patience, mothers about discipline, children about courage. He spoke to no one, yet each left changed, for in his silence they heard their own truth echo back. The old samurai's silence was not emptiness, it was mastery. He had learned that true power was not in the swing of a blade, but in the stillness of the spirit. The blade cuts once, silence cuts forever. But as the seasons turned and the leaves fell again, another storm approached, not from the sky, but from the past. A messenger arrived one evening, carrying a torn flag marked with the crest of an old clan. He sought the old samurai by name, the name the village had long forgotten. The man bowed deeply and placed the flag before the old warrior. His hands trembled. Behind his silence, the old samurai understood. His past had come calling again. That night the village saw light in the old man's house for the first time in years. A candle flickered against the shoji screens, and the sound of the rain returned. The villagers could feel the weight of something shifting, as though the mountain itself held its breath once more. When dawn came, the door stood open. The broom was gone, and in its place leaned an old worn scabbard, empty. The old samurai had left before sunrise. No one knew where he went, but word soon spread of unrest in the southern provinces. Old clans rising again, vengeance being whispered in the dark. And in those whispers the name of the old samurai was spoken once more, not as a legend but as a warning. The village watched the road fade into mist, wondering if they would ever see him again. Yet deep within every heart was the echo of that stillness he had left behind. The silence he carried had become their own, and far away, beneath a sky the color of steel, the old samurai walked alone once more, his blade unseen, his purpose unspoken, his silence unbroken. The war had returned, but this time, he would fight a different kind of battle, a battle not of swords, but of spirit. The old samurai traveled south beneath a sky veiled in smoke. Villages once filled with laughter now lay quiet, their rice fields trampled by the boots of armies that had forgotten what they were fighting for. The old man walked without haste, his step steady, his eyes calm. He carried no weapon that anyone could see, only a long cloth-wrapped bundle slung across his back, and the unshakable presence of one who had long ago made peace with both death and life. As he moved through the war-torn countryside, people whispered his name again. To some it was a ghost story, to others a prophecy, a nameless warrior who had abandoned the sword yet could end battles without striking a blow. To the frightened and the desperate, he became a symbol of hope, though he sought none of it for himself. Each evening, he would stop beside a river or an abandoned temple and sit in silence as the world burned around him. He watched the flames from afar, their crackling merging with the wind's sorrowful hum. He did not pray, for prayer requires asking. He simply listened, for in silence one hears everything, even the cries of those too afraid to speak. It was not long before the war found him. A band of mercenaries, half-starved and desperate, came across him sitting beneath a weathered Torii gate. Their armor was mismatched, their eyes wild with hunger and anger. They demanded his belongings, shouting curses and threats. The old samurai looked up at them with neither fear nor disdain. His silence was unyielding, and that only enraged them further. One of the men lunged forward, swinging a rusted blade. The sound of metal cut through the air, and yet no blood was spilled. The old man had not moved, yet the attacker stumbled backward, his sword snapping in half against a stone at the samurai's feet. The others froze. The air itself seemed to thicken, as if time had bowed before something greater. The old man rose slowly to his feet, his gaze steady and compassionate. The mercenaries could not explain it, but in that gaze they saw themselves, the cruelty, the fear, the futility. One by one they dropped their weapons and fled into the forest, unable to face what his silence had shown them. The old samurai turned his eyes toward the horizon. The time for running from the past had ended. He could feel it now, the weight of his old clan stirring, the restless shadow of vengeance seeking to pull the world back into darkness. That night, he reached a mountain pass. There stood a small shrine he remembered from his youth. It was there he had once trained as a boy, under the watchful eye of his master, a man who had taught him that a blade was not meant to kill, but to reveal. Inside the shrine, dust lay thick upon the floor. The air was cold, yet still alive with memories. The old samurai knelt before the altar and unwrapped the bundle on his back. Inside lay his sword, the one he had not touched for many years. The scabbard was cracked, the handle worn smooth from decades of use. He drew the blade slowly. It gleamed faintly in the candlelight, reflecting both age and eternity. He looked at it for a long time, not as a warrior, but as a man who had learned the cost of what it once represented. To most, the sword was a symbol of strength. To him it was a mirror. It had shown him the truth, that every battle won by force is a battle lost within. He placed the blade across his knees and closed his eyes. The night grew colder. The wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, and the candle flame flickered like a fragile heartbeat.